The wind was a monster out in the canyon. It howled through the rocks, tearing snow from the ground and throwing it against the sky like a fistful of bone dust. The logs of the ancient cabin groaned under the pressure, a lonely, forgotten sound in the middle of a world that had turned completely white. But outside, a man stood bare-chested against the freezing gale. His name was Talon, and the cold had given up trying to hurt him years ago. Steam rolled off his scarred shoulders as his axe came down, again and again, splitting frozen pine with a rhythm like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. He didn't look at the horizon. He didn't look for anyone. The wilderness was his only neighbor, and that's exactly how he wanted it. Inside, his 5-year-old daughter, Maya, was a small, warm bundle of quilts. She was the only other heartbeat for 100 miles, and she was the one who saw it first. A faint crunching sound in the snow, a sound where no sound should ever be. She pressed her small nose to the frosted glass, her dark eyes going wide with a child's pure curiosity. A figure small and hunched was stumbling through the drifts, not walking, collapsing. With the stubborn strength only a small child possesses, she wrenched the heavy door open, the wind trying to rip it from her tiny hands. "Papa!" Talon froze, the axe held mid-swing. He looked up, and his solitary world tilted on its axis. The storm had spit out a stranger. A young woman, barely out of her teens, was swaying on her feet like she'd crossed the entire world just to die on his doorstep. Her dress was paper-thin and torn, her lips split and blue with cold. Snow clung to her eyelashes like tiny, perfect diamonds. She stopped a few feet from him, her chest rising and falling in shallow, desperate breaths that fogged in the air. With a hand that shook so violently you could see it from the doorway, she held out a small, tightly bound leather sack. Her voice was a shard of ice, a whisper nearly stolen by the wind. "I can work," she breathed. "One night. Just wait till the storm breaks." Talon said nothing. His eyes, as hard and unforgiving as the flint scattered across the canyon floor, scanned her from head to toe. He'd seen desperation before. He'd seen hunger. He'd seen people utterly broken by the wild. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't a plea for help. It was a bargain. Her life for whatever was inside that mysterious sack. Before he could move, Maya, fearless and barefoot, ran out into the snow. Her small feet sank into the white as she grabbed the stranger's frozen hand. "She's cold, Papa," she said, her voice small but firm. She looked up at him, her face full of a child's impossible, stubborn hope. "Can she stay forever?" The woman flinched. The word forever hit her like a physical blow. A violent tremor crossed her lips before she smothered it, her eyes dropping to the ground as if a great, invisible weight had just been slammed onto her shoulders. What in the world was she so afraid of? Talon's jaw tightened. He set the axe down, the thud muffled by the fresh snow. He took one step, then another, his heavy boots crunching a path toward her. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together at the bottom of a river. Inside, he pointed to the cabin, offering no warmth, no welcome, just a single stark command. One night, that's all. As she crossed the threshold, the woman's knees nearly buckled. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and safety, and the sudden warmth seemed to shock her system. She didn't say a word. She didn't even look at him. She just moved toward the hearth, her body stiff, letting the heat from the fire seep into her frozen bones. Her name, she would later say, was Chenoa. But for now, she was just a ghost the storm had delivered. She moved like someone who was used to being invisible. Quick, quiet, taking up as little space as humanly possible. She found the pot, the dried beans, the salt pork, moving with a silent instinct that said she'd spent a lifetime working in kitchens that were not her own. Talon watched her from the corner, his massive arms crossed over his chest. His silence wasn't empty. It was a weighing, a measuring. Every move she made, he tracked. The way her shawl was pulled so tight around her neck, even in the growing heat of the cabin. The way she refused to meet his eyes for even a second. The way her hands shook as she stirred the simple meal in the pot. Maya tugged on his arm, her innocent voice a whisper in the tense quiet. "She makes it smell like home." He didn't answer. He couldn't, because the smell reminded him of a time before the silence. A time before Maya was the only other heartbeat in his world. a time with his wife. The snow hammered the walls, muting the world outside. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the quiet simmer of the pot. As Chenoa bent low to check the food, her shawl slipped. Just for a second, and that's when he saw it. On her collarbone, just peeking out from the edge of the fabric. It wasn't a bruise. A bruise is just a blotch of color, an accident. This was different. This was deliberate. It was a mark, a symbol seared into her skin like a cattle brand. A perfectly shaped, blackened star. She adjusted the shawl instantly, her movements sharp and panicked. But it was too late. Talon had seen it. The image was burned into his mind. He said nothing, but the muscles in his jaw shifted once. A tiny movement that spoke volumes. Who brands a person? And why? When she finally set the bowls of hot stew before them, she didn't sit down to eat. She just stood there, hands folded, her gaze fixed on the floorboards as if she were waiting to be dismissed. Talon gave a single curt gesture toward the hearth, and only then did she take her place on the floor, keeping a careful distance from them both. Maya, however, had no concept of distance or danger. She slid over, studying the woman's face with all the unfiltered curiosity of a child. "What's your name?" The woman hesitated, her voice as fragile as thin glass. "Chenoa." The name hung in the smoky air. Talon tested it silently, his eyes unreadable. Chenoa didn't look at him. She focused on the spoon in her hand, forcing herself to swallow, though every bite seemed to cause her pain. For a long time the only sound was the storm clawing at the roof. Talon sat as still as a stone carving, though his gaze kept flicking toward the shawl at Chenoa's throat. The way she held it so tightly, as if hiding not just flesh, but a terrible memory. His daughter's innocent laughter broke the heavy quiet. She chattered about ribbons, about the geese she dreamed of chasing when spring finally came. Chenoa offered a faint, fleeting smile, and for just an instant, her face softened. You could see the girl she might have been, before the world had turned so hard and cruel. But just as quickly, the smile vanished, and her eyes filled with that faraway hollowness again. She rose, moving to wash the bowls, though no one had asked her to. Her knees wavered, and she nearly dropped the heavy iron pot. Talon's hand shot out, his reflexes impossibly fast, steadying it before it could crash to the floor. For the briefest moment, her fingers brushed against his, rough skin against rough skin. She jerked back as if she'd been burned by a hot coal. He studied her, not with desire, but with the sharp analytical gaze of a man who had learned that every scar tells a story. And this woman was a book of untold stories. He wanted to ask. He wanted to demand answers. But his tongue was heavy with a lifetime of caution. He just set the pot aside and let her finish her work in silence. As the hours stretched long and the snow howled even louder, Maya's energy finally faded. She curled up by the fire, laying her head directly on Chenoa's lap as if she had always belonged there. Chenoa froze, her whole body going rigid at the unexpected weight, the casual trust. Then slowly, hesitantly, her hand moved. She began smoothing the child's hair with a tenderness that spoke of a deep, forgotten longing to be wanted. Glistening tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Talon saw it all. He turned away before she could notice, giving her the dignity of her private grief. He stepped to the door, opened it just a crack, and let the icy wind cut across his bare skin. He breathed deep, as though the cold might steady the strange, unfamiliar turmoil in his chest. Beyond the swirling white, the land lay silent and deadly. Yet he felt the weight of unseen eyes, the kind that had followed him his whole life, from the town, from the past, from men who never forgave and never forgot. Behind him, the fire hissed. Chenoa's voice, as soft as a prayer, rose in a quiet lullaby as she sang to the half-asleep child. The sound curled through the cabin like smoke, carrying a warmth into corners that had been cold for years. And then his blood ran cold. He knew that song. It was a tune his wife used to sing to him, a melody only the two of them had known. How could this stranger, this ghost from the storm, know his wife's song? He closed the door slowly, his shadow stretching long and menacing across the floor. He leaned the axe by the wall, but his stance was still that of a man ready for battle. He didn't trust this sudden gentleness. He didn't trust the bruised silence, the branded skin, or the impossible lullaby. He didn't trust what his daughter's innocent heart was demanding of him. Outside, the storm pressed harder, as if sealing them all together in that cabin with no hope of escape. And then came a new sound, faint at first, but certain. A heavy, deliberate knock at the door, carrying through the thick timber like a judge's gavel. The knock came again, low and steady, as though the storm itself had grown knuckles. Talon rose from the shadows, his body taut, every muscle braced. Chenoa stiffened, one arm instinctively pulling the sleeping Maya closer against her, her other hand clutching the shawl at her throat. The flames threw nervous, dancing light across the log walls, and even the wind seemed to hush, waiting. Talon unbarred the door with measured strength. A gust of snow spun inward, biting like 1,000 tiny knives. A man stood there, a specter in the storm. Sheriff Calder, his hat rimmed with frost, his breath a thick cloud in the bitter air. He squinted past Talon's imposing frame, and his eyes found her at once. The stranger by the fire, his mouth pressed into a thin, hard line. "You've taken in company, Talon," Calder said, his tone too calm, too casual. "Town's already talking." Talon's eyes narrowed. Storm's no place for a woman to wander alone. The sheriff's gaze lingered on Chenoa, heavy with something she couldn't decipher. She lowered her head, the familiar weight of shame settling on her like a physical chain. His next words carried the sharp edge of town gossip, of whispers more dangerous than any blade. "Men say she left her last place in disgrace, that she ain't fit for decent homes." He paused, letting the poison sink in. "They'll wonder why she's sitting in yours." Chenoa's cheeks burned, though no fire touched them. She wished she could shrink into the wood itself, disappear into the shadows. Calder's words echoed the voices she had fled. Clara Finch hissing accusations in the mercantile. Elias Boone's cruel laugh booming through the saloon. The verdicts passed by people who never cared for the truth. Used up. Clara had spat the words once, loud enough for the whole store to hear. Marked goods. The memory scalded her even now. Talon's jaw was a knot of stone. His silence was not agreement, it was resistance. But he knew better than anyone that silence allowed rumor to grow like a weed. Calder adjusted his hat, sighing. "Keep her if you will, but snow melts, Talon, and when it does, tongues sharpen. You've been judged by this town before. Folks won't soften now just because you have." He didn't wait for a reply. He just tipped his hat and vanished back into the storm. The door closed with a heavy thud. The sheriff's boots faded into the howling wind, but the damage was done. His words remained, echoing against the logs. Chenoa rose slowly, setting Maya gently aside. She reached for the pot again, as if hard labor could scrub away the humiliation. Her hands trembled so fiercely that the spoon clattered against the iron rim. "You don't have to do that," Talon began, his voice rough. But she cut him off, her own voice brittle as frost. "It's all I know how to do. Work. Serve. It's what keeps me safe." Her eyes never met his. She moved with a mechanical, desperate precision. Cleaning bowls that were already clean, stacking wood that was already stacked. As she bent, the shawl slipped again, revealing the ugly, star-shaped brand. She yanked the fabric back into place, but the truth lingered in the air between them. She had known hands that hurt, voices that cut, a world that discarded her for daring to survive. Maya, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, patted over. She caught Chenoa's skirt in her small hand. "Don't cry," she whispered, though no tear had fallen. "It's nicer when you smile." The simple, innocent words pierced deeper than any rumor. Chenoa knelt, her knees pressing into the cold floor, and pressed her forehead against the child's soft hair. "I forgot how," she murmured, the words barely audible. Talon saw the trembling in her shoulders, the fragile thread that was holding her together. Something stirred deep inside him, an unwelcome echo of the years he had stood accused by that same town, called a savage, unwanted, his every kindness measured against their prejudice. He knew what it was to carry a shame that was not your own, but words were trapped in his chest. He just pulled a small tin of ointment from a high shelf and set it on the table near her. His gesture was simple, almost brusque. But Chenoa's eyes flickered toward it with something that looked like astonishment. The storm raged louder outside, snow slamming against the walls as if trying to bury them all alive. Inside, the cabin seemed like a fragile island, afloat in a sea of white judgment. The firelight wavered, catching the sharp angles of Chenoa's profile, the hollow cheeks, the stubborn resolve carved by years of rejection. She spoke suddenly, her voice breaking the heavy hush. "I was accused of something I never did," she said, her voice shaking. "No one cared about the truth. They just saw me as weak, easy to stain. A rumor is all it takes to make a woman unclean." Her hand gripped the shawl until her knuckles turned white. "Once you're marked, it doesn't wash away. Not ever." Her confession hung in the air, like smoke too thick to breathe. Maya, uncomprehending, just wrapped her small arms around Chenoa's waist. The child's simple, unconditional acceptance was a balm sharper than any pity. Talon crouched, tossing another heavy log into the fire. Sparks leapt, showering the hearth in brief, brilliant light. "Storms don't last forever," he said, his words flat, yet heavy with a hidden meaning. She finally met his eyes, searching for mockery or dismissal. But instead, she found only steadiness. A quiet as strong and unmoving as a mountain. The warmth of it unsettled her more than any cruelty ever could. She turned away, terrified of what it might awaken in her. And just then, through the howl of the storm, came another sound. Not a knock this time. It was laughter, mean, drunken laughter, muffled by the snow but getting closer. The laughter struck sharper than a blade. Chenoa stiffened where she sat, her arms tightening protectively around Maya, as though the sound itself could tear the child from her. Talon stood framed in the doorway, shoulders squared, the storm whipping around him like a dark cloak. His eyes scanned the swirling darkness, searching for the shadows behind the sound. Then as suddenly as it had risen, the laughter faded, swallowed by the wind, leaving only the groan of the pines and the hush of falling snow. He shut the door with a measured calm, but the echo lingered inside the cabin like a bad omen. Chenoa's heartbeat was so loud she was certain he could hear it across the room. "They followed me," she whispered, though she couldn't say who they were. The faces blurred together in her mind, a sea of malice, of voices that thrived on her ruin. Talon said nothing. He simply placed the heavy wooden bar across the door, his motions deliberate, as if he were sealing out more than just the cold. His silence wasn't dismissal, it was a shield, and yet its weight pressed on her as fiercely as any judgment. She lowered her head, ashamed that even here, in the heart of the wilderness, she could not escape the tongues that hunted her. By morning, the storm had eased. The drifts rose high against the logs, and a thin gray light crept through the frosted window panes. Talon shouldered his heavy coat, the one she had mended with small, uneven stitches, and stepped outside to split wood. The air was sharp, crystalline, and every sound carried for miles. Chenoa stood at the window, watching his steady, powerful rhythm, the rise and fall of the axe. Each strike spoke of survival, of a man hardened by battles, both seen and unseen. Maya came and tugged on her skirt, her voice bright with a child's simple wisdom. "He doesn't smile much," the child said, "but he keeps us safe." Then, with the stubborn conviction only a 5-year-old could hold, she added, "You make him softer." Chenoa's throat tightened. No one had ever spoken of her as a blessing before. Always, she was a burden, a rumor, a shame. She knelt, brushing the child's hair from her face, letting the words settle into the hollow places inside her that she had thought were long dead. Later, when Talon returned, his arms piled high with firewood, she busied herself at the hearth, preparing what little they had. Her hands moved with a quiet devotion, though her mind kept circling back to Calder's warning, to Clara Finch's spiteful tongue, to Elias Boone's cruel laughter in the saloon. She could hear them now, their voices thick with scorn. "She'll take what she can, that one. Apache scraps for an Apache's house." The memory of the mercantile was so clear. The shelves lined with tins and bolts of fabric, her basket clutched to her chest as the whispers coiled around her like snakes. Clara's voice, sharp as a whip, had cut through the air. "Used up, I tell you. Marked for life." The other women had nodded, their eyes gleaming, eager to believe the worst. Elias Boone had leaned back in his chair, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt floor, a nasty smirk on his face. She'll find some fool desperate enough, or savage enough. The whole room had laughed with him. She had fled, her basket forgotten, and no one had stopped her. Now seated at Talon's table, those words burned anew. She stirred the pot with too much force, the broth sloshing over the rim and hissing on the hot stove. Talon noticed, but again, he said nothing. His dark eyes just followed her, reading the story she would not voice. He understood silence better than most. When evening fell, the sheriff returned. His boots stamped the porch, knocking snow free. He tipped his hat as he entered, his gaze sweeping the small room. "Snow's lightened some," he said. "Men were in the saloon last night. Their talk was ugly." His glance flicked toward Chenoa, who shrank back as if she'd been struck. "What men talk about don't concern me," Talon said, his tone flat as a blade, though his hand tightened on the back of his chair. "Don't it?" Calder pressed, his voice weary, not cruel. "They say you're harboring a scandal. Say it just proves what they've always claimed, that you don't belong here, and neither does she. A storm's one thing, Talon, but when the thaw comes, words will spread faster than a wildfire." Chenoa bowed her head, the shame burning her cheeks raw. The sheriff sighed as though he were carrying a weight too heavy for his badge. "I have no law to turn her out," he said, his eyes on Talon, "but gossip is law enough in these parts." He lingered a moment longer, then left, the door closing behind him with a thud that echoed with finality. The silence in the cabin was thick, suffocating. Chenoa's hands trembled as she reached for a mending basket, though there was nothing left to repair. "He's right," she murmured, her voice a ghost. "I shouldn't stay. Shame clings worse than snow. It melts and stains everything it touches." Talon watched her, his dark eyes steady, unblinking. He didn't answer at once. He moved to the shelf, took down a small jar of dried herbs and set it on the table in front of her. His voice was quiet, but it filled the entire room. "Stay until you're strong. The storm ain't over yet." His simple words carried more protection than any oath, more comfort than any promise. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of warmth sparked in her chest, but the fear of the gossip, of what would happen when the snow melted, gnawed at her, reminding her how easily kindness could be twisted into scorn by hateful tongues. She didn't dare let herself hope. That night, Maya prayed aloud by her bedside, her voice soft but earnest. "Please let her stay, God. Please don't send her away like Mama." The plea pierced Chenoa's heart, breaking something she had kept hidden and locked away for years. She turned her face to the wall so they would not see the silent tears finally slipping free. Talon heard. His expression didn't change, but he heard. He stood at the door again, listening to the night. The storm had quieted, but now faint voices carried through the stillness. Men's laughter again, closer this time, crueler. He gripped the handle of the axe at his side, his muscles coiling like springs. Though he did not step out, his silence grew heavier, like a rope pulled taut, straining toward its breaking point. Chenoa sat by the fire, watching him. The child slept, her breath a steady, peaceful rhythm against the quilts. The room was warm, yet Chenoa shivered. She felt the truth pressing in on her. The gossip wouldn't rest at whispers. It would come knocking again, not with words but with fists. And she was terrified that she had brought this danger to the only place that had ever offered her mercy. Talon turned at last, his shadow stretching long and dark across the wall. His eyes met hers unflinching. "They won't stop," he said simply. "Not till they see you gone." His voice held no threat, only a cold, hard certainty. Her heart stuttered. She wanted to protest, to promise she would leave at dawn, but the words were stuck in her throat. Instead, she whispered, "Then what will you do?" The question hung between them, trembling like the wick of a candle just before it catches flame. He didn't answer. He only stepped to the door, pulled it open to the night, and the cold wind rushed in, carrying the sound of men's voices, riding closer and closer on the snow. And that's when he finally looked down at the leather sack she had carried, which lay forgotten by the hearth. With a sudden, decisive movement, he strode over, untied the knot, and turned it upside down. It wasn't gold. It wasn't food. It was a single, small object that fell onto the floorboards with a soft clatter. A hand-carved bird made of pine. It was identical to the one he had carved for his wife the day before she died. The small wooden bird lay on the floor, a ghost from his past. How? How was this possible? Talon stared at it, the blood draining from his face. This wasn't a coincidence. The lullaby, and now this bird. This woman wasn't a stranger. She was a key to a lock he thought had been rusted shut forever. Outside, the voices grew louder, their laughter heavy with cruelty, sharp enough to pierce through the thick log walls. He looked up from the bird to Chenoa. Her eyes were wide with terror, not at the men outside, but at the look on his face. She knew what he was seeing. She knew what it meant. Before he could demand an answer, boots crunched on the frozen ground just outside the porch. The first face appeared in the storm's swirling snow. Elias Boone, his beard rimmed with ice, his smirk broad and ugly. Two other men flanked him, townsfolk filled with whiskey courage, their eyes gleaming with a special kind of mob-fueled mockery. Boone stopped a few paces from the open door, folding his arms. His voice boomed through the night. Well now, the cabin glows like a hearth, and I hear it holds more than just wood tonight. His gaze slid past Talon, searching for Chenoa's outline by the fire. So it's true, the Apache is keeping what the town cast off. Talon didn't flinch. His silence was more dangerous than any curse. The wind drove hard against his bare chest, but he stood rooted to the spot, his gaze as steady as a rock. Boone laughed, emboldened by the stillness. Didn't figure you'd take pity on scraps, Talon, but I suppose even a savage needs a woman to warm his bed, and this one's already marked. Suits you both, I reckon. Chenoa's stomach turned, shame rising like bile in her throat. But this time, something else flared in her too, something sharp and painful. Her hands gripped the arm of the chair so tightly her knuckles went white. She had fled from whispers her entire life, but here the words came bare and cruel, spoken right to her face. She could feel Maya's warm breath against her chest, innocent, trusting, and completely unaware of the venom in those sounds. Talon's voice finally broke the air, low and steady, each word a stone. You'll leave, now. Boone spat into the snow, the dark stains steaming in the cold. Or what? You'll swing that axe at me like you swing it at wood? Won't change what she is. The men at his side chuckled, their laughter jagged and thin, but there was a flicker of unease beneath it. Talon's stillness carried a weight they couldn't name, a kind of power they didn't understand. And then Chenoa rose, trembling but upright. Her shawl fell open, revealing the faded brand at her collarbone for all to see. Her voice wavered, but it carried across the snow. I am not what you call me. I am not what you say. Her breath caught, but she forced the words through her fear. I belong to no one, and I will not be thrown aside like a rag. Boone sneered, his grin faltering for just a second at her unexpected defiance. A bold tongue for a woman living on mercy. He took a step closer, his boots crunching on the ice, the firelight catching the pure malice in his eyes. Before he could say more, another set of footsteps approached. Sheriff Calder emerged from the storm, his hat pulled low, his scarf stiff with frost. His eyes flicked from Boone to Talon to the woman standing her ground in the doorway. That's far enough, Boone. Boone barked a harsh laugh. The lawman comes crawling through a blizzard to guard a ruined woman's honor. Didn't figure you for the type, Calder. Calder's hand rested on the butt of his pistol, though his tone remained unnervingly calm. You've said your piece. Let the storm keep it. Go home before it's your pride that's ruined here tonight. The moment held, sharp as ice. Boone's men shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Talon's unblinking predatory stare and the sheriff's firm stance. The blizzard pressed in, howling around them. Finally, Boone spat again, his smirk looking hollow and forced. Keep her then. Keep the shame. But when the thaw comes, the town will remember. They turned, their boots crunching away into the night, their laughter trailing behind them, thin and false. The storm swallowed them whole. Silence settled, heavy and thick. Talon closed the door slowly, lowering the heavy bar back into place. Chenoa's chest heaved, her heart slamming against her ribs. Her legs felt weak, yet something inside her no longer felt bowed. She had spoken, however faintly, and the world had not ended. Maya stirred from the quilts, blinking sleepily. They were loud, she murmured. Then reaching for Chenoa's hand, she asked, "You're not leaving, are you?" The simple question broke what little defense Chenoa had left. She knelt, pulling the girl close, pressing her face into the child's soft hair. "I don't want to," she whispered, though the words were more of a prayer than a promise. Talon stood by the fire, shadows cutting sharp lines across his scarred chest. He reached for the blanket draped over a chair and stepped toward her. With quiet care, he set it around her trembling shoulders, his hand lingering for the briefest moment. His silence carried more than words ever could. Acceptance, shelter, a strength steady enough to share. Her breath caught, her eyes glistening, though she dared not meet his gaze. He then knelt beside her, picking up the small wooden bird from the floor. He held it out on his palm. His voice was a low growl. "Where did you get this?" Before she could answer, the wind shifted, carrying a new sound through the chinks in the logs. A sound not of laughter, but of splintering wood, sharp and dangerously close. Talon froze, head lifting. Every muscle in his body coiled. Chenoa's breath hitched. It was followed by the scrape of metal against wood. Deliberate, invasive. Someone had not gone home after all. And this time, they weren't here to talk. The scrape against the wood was no accident. It was the sound of a crowbar prying at the door frame. Talon moved with a quiet, deadly precision, lifting the axe from beside the door. His hand closed over the smooth, worn handle, as though it were an extension of his own arm. The firelight carved the tension in his frame into something primal, something ancient. A man born of survival, as steady and dangerous as the mountains outside. Chenoa rose from her place by the hearth, pulling Maya behind her. The blanket clutched around them both like a shield. Her breath trembled, but her eyes stayed fixed on him, as if she were willing herself to believe that he could hold back the entire world if he had to. The door shuddered once, then again, the wood groaning in protest. A laugh followed, low and sour. It was Boone's voice, spilling through the cracks. "Thought you could shut us out with a little wooden bar? Thought we'd walk away so easy?" A heavy slam rattled the entire frame. "No, Talon, this storm's not the only thing that'll bury you tonight." Maya whimpered, but Chenoa held her close, her fear battling something fiercer, a hot resolve born of being hunted for far too long. She whispered into the child's hair, "Stay quiet. Trust him." Her own voice broke, yet steadied again. It was the first time she had spoken with such certainty in years. The wood splintered near the latch. Talon stepped forward, pressing his broad palm flat against the door, feeling the force on the other side. The axe was heavy and ready in his other hand. His voice rumbled low, carrying not anger but a final command. "Leave!" The reply came as a deafening crash. The door burst inward, ripped from its hinges, and a swirl of snow and wind exploded into the cabin. With it came Boone and his two men. The storm howled at their backs, but it was the fire of hatred inside that clashed with the warmth of the small cabin. Boone's eyes, wild and bloodshot, gleamed when they fell on Chenoa. His smirk curved into a cruel sneer. "There she is, hiding behind the savage like some kind of saint. Let's see if she defends herself now that the whole town won't." Before the insult could sink deeper, Talon moved. The axe swept upward, not striking, but barring their path, the sharpened steel blade gleaming a hellish orange in the firelight. His stillness held a terrifying danger. Each breath was measured, every muscle wound like a bowstring pulled to its limit. Boone faltered for a half-second, but the whiskey and his own festering pride stiffened his spine. He lunged, his fists swinging wildly. The fight was sudden, brutal, and claustrophobic in the small space. Talon caught the blow with his forearm, the impact echoing with a dull thud. He drove Boone back into the storm's bite. One of the other men swung a heavy club. Talon twisted, the axe handle slamming hard into the man's ribs, sending him sprawling into the snow with a grunt of pain. Snow and smoke mingled as the cabin filled with shouts and the crack of splintering wood. Chenoa shielded Maya, her heart hammering against her ribs. But when Boone staggered back toward them, his face twisted with pure rage. Something inside her finally snapped. She rose, stepping between him and the child, her voice fierce and clear, despite her trembling. "You will not touch her. You will not touch me again." The declaration startled even herself, but the raw strength in it was undeniable. Boone's sneer wavered, and that moment of hesitation was all Talon needed. He seized him from behind, dragging him back with a grip like iron. They slammed against the wall, rattling the shelves. A candle toppled, falling into a small pile of dry straw near the woodpile. Flames licked upward instantly, smoke billowing quick and thick. "Fire!" Chinoa gasped, yanking Maya back, stamping frantically at the sparks. But the blaze spread with terrifying speed, biting hungrily at the dry wood of the cabin walls. Boone twisted in Talon's hold, landing a desperate blow that split Talon's lip. But Talon did not loosen his grip. He drove him relentlessly toward the broken doorway, forcing him out into the raging storm. The other man scrambled after them, fleeing into the blizzard's roar. Just then, a shout cut through the chaos. Boots pounded on the porch, a pistol drawn. It was Sheriff Calder, his eyes wide at the sight of the flames climbing the inside wall. "Boone!" he barked, his voice carrying an authority as sharp as steel. The fight stilled. Boone staggered in the snow, his face bloodied, his breath harsh, all his bravado cracking and falling away. "Enough," Calder warned, his pistol aimed steady. "You'll answer for this. You've gone too far." He seized Boone's arm, snapping heavy iron cuffs around his wrists. The law, slow but sure, had finally pressed down. Boone spat curses, but his fight drained away with the heat of his rage. The storm swallowed him as Calder dragged him away. Talon stood in the doorway, chest heaving, blood dripping from his lip, smoke curling around his scarred frame. Inside, Chinoa was fighting the fire with frantic hands, beating it down with a heavy blanket, her hair wild with sparks. Talon crossed the room in 2 strides, seizing the blanket too, their hands meeting in the desperate effort. Together they smothered the last of the flames, the room filling with a choking haze until the last glowing ember died. Silence fell, broken only by Maya's small coughs as she clung to Chinoa's skirts. The cabin was scarred, blackened in patches, but it still stood, and so did they. Chinoa sank to her knees, gathering Maya close, tears streaking her smoke-stained cheeks. Her voice cracked as she looked up at Talon, the weight of everything crashing down on her. "I should have gone. I brought this here. You nearly lost everything because of me." Talon knelt too, his large frame folding close to hers, his eyes steady on her face. "No," he said, his voice quiet but fierce. "They brought it, not you." His hand, rough and calloused, reached for her shoulder, steadying her trembling frame. She searched his face, expecting pity or anger, but found only a raw, unshakable truth. The weight of shame she had carried for so long, the brand on her skin and on her soul, finally loosened, if only by a single thread. For the first time, she believed the blame was not hers to carry. "My wife," Talon said, his voice a low rumble. "Her name was Lena. That was her song. This was her bird." He held up the small carving. "She had a younger sister, one she wrote to me about, but whom I never met, one who was driven from town after Lena's accident." Chinoa's breath hitched. A sob escaped her lips. "They lied," she whispered, the words torn from her. "Boone lied. It wasn't an accident. He was there. He pushed her. He wanted our land. He told everyone I was cursed, that I was a liar, so no one would ever believe me." The whole ugly truth came spilling out, the poison of years finally being drawn. He had sheltered his wife's sister without even knowing it. He had protected the only witness to her murder. Maya crawled between them, her small hands pressing theirs together. "See, Papa?" she said, her voice filled with a child's simple, profound logic. "I told you she could stay forever." The firelight glowed softer now, the storm outside finally easing into a hush. Chinoa looked at Talon, truly looked, and in his silence she found something she had never known. Not possession, not rescue, but a place to finally, truly belong. His lips curved, a faint, almost unseen smile, but it was enough to break the stillness of years, and in that moment, the frozen world began to thaw. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. And let me know in the comments, what do you think the town did when they found out the truth about Elias Boone?